Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, Jon Valeri. Today, I'm joined by USA Today bestselling author Jon Land, who has written more than 50 books. Jon is perhaps best known for his award-winning thrillers featuring Texas Ranger Caitlin Strong, which hit double digits with last year's Strong as Steel. The series' 11th entry, Strong from the Heart, is due out in July. He has also written the Blaine McCracken novels, collaborated with visionaries such as Heather Graham and Fabrizio Baccardi, and lent his talents to several nonfiction projects, including No Surrender, Faith, Family, and Finding Your Way, written with Navy SEAL Patrick Bisher. In 2017, Jon embraced a new challenge, taking over writing duties for the venerable Murder, She Wrote books, which are based on the iconic television show featuring Angela Lansbury in the role of mystery novelist and amateur sleuth Jessica J.B. Fletcher. At the time, the series tallied 46 titles written by Donald Bain, often with the assistance of his wife Renee. While Land's involvement in A Date with Murder was initially envisioned as a collaboration between the two, Bain's passing meant that he would have to finish that book based on a concept and the few pages that already existed. Manuscript for Murder and Murder in Red soon followed, and the series reached a milestone in 2019 with its 50th entry, A Time for Murder, a book whose alternating time frames allowed readers to meet Jessica Fletcher as a young wife and schoolteacher for the very first time. The series' newest entry, The Murder of 12, is a modern take on Agatha Christie's classic locked room mystery And Then There Were None. Jessica finds herself stranded by several feet of snow at Cabot Cove's Hill House Hotel while members of a wedding party are being picked off one by one. Kirk has called the book a tense, complex, action-filled mystery with shoals of red herrings and plenty of surprises. And while that assessment is entirely true, Land himself would be happy with the application of one simple F word: fun. I'll let him tell you why.
Hi, everybody. I am excited today to introduce you to the always prolific, entirely entertaining, and refreshingly candid Jon Land, whose new book, Murder, She Wrote, The Murder of 12, comes out on Tuesday, May 26th, which will probably be a day after this video goes up. So, Jon, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. You have quite the backdrop.
I like yours better, to tell you the truth. I'm loving those books. I mean, very impressive.
Well,
matter of fact, I'm going to go out and get whatever that is so I can, I mean, this big bridge behind me, I'd rather have books.
It's all about the books. That's all right. If you had books behind you, I'd spend this entire time like looking over your shoulder trying to see what they were. So it's probably as well. The beautiful
good idea. I don't have them then.
It is. It would distract me, and I'm easily distracted anyway. But thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have you on the show. And as I mentioned, you've been very prolific throughout your career. You have over 50 books to your credit now. So we're going to sort of limit the scope of our conversation to your involvement with the Murder, She Wrote books, just because I feel like otherwise we could talk all day, and we probably could anyway, because initially I thought, how much is there to say? And then I started coming up with questions, and I'm like, this isn't going to be a problem. We can easily fill our time. But quickly for background, so the Murder, She Wrote books, they have been around for decades. There was 46 books that Donald Bain wrote or co-wrote with a couple of collaborators before his unfortunate passing. So you actually came in at book number 47, A Date with Murder. But let me just ask you, how did your involvement with Murder, She Wrote officially begin?
Well, I share the same agent as Don Bain. I knew him, not tremendously well, but I did know him. So it was an opportunity that arose because we shared the same agent. And when Don's health started to fail, the original plan was I would work with him on as many as it took while he was still alive, and then I would take the series over when he decided to give it up. But his health declined faster than expected, and I inherited the series earlier than I expected.
Sure. And can I ask you, you said you were, acquainted with Don, and he obviously is sort of a legendary figure himself, very prolific, and he either wrote or ghost wrote something like 125 books, a really impressive career. So I'm wondering, what was your relationship with him, and did you find that has he inspired your work or your output throughout the years?
No. The fact was that I have great respect for just about every writer I meet. But when taking over a series, the only way I'm capable of doing it is taking ownership and making it my own. And Don Bain was not a great fan of the television show. It's not that he didn't like it, it's that he never watched it.
Right.
Whereas I was a fan of the television show. So my attitude, since I was very familiar with the TV show, not at all familiar with the book series, when I took over already on deadline, I decided I couldn't do both. I couldn't stay faithful to the book series and the TV series because from everything I was able to research and the handful of books that I did read, there was a lot of divergence. So I decided consciously to jump off from the television show by asking myself if Murder, She Wrote, one of the most iconic, successful television dramas of all time, if it was being made today with the same people, what would it look like? And that's where I started. That was my jumping off point. That's where I started book 47, which I had inherited from Don, the concept, but I started the writing pretty much from scratch.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I remember, when it was announced that you were taking over the book, Don's name was still on the cover. There was a concept. There was maybe a brief amount of pages that were passed on to you. So basically, just you took that idea and you spun it into your own. Sure.
Correct.
So that's great, and that actually, leads me nicely into a topic that I wanted to discuss because, as you mentioned, you did sort of a crash course. You immersed yourself in the television show, and the show does sort of have a different energy and tone than some of the Donald Bain books do, and some different characters that you were able to revive that didn't necessarily appear in his books. So can you talk a little bit about how you endeavored to, to meld the two? And is it difficult to try to balance tradition with your own creative vision because there's so much there with 46 books and 12 seasons of a very popular show?
Well, it's two different. It's two different questions there. Let me start with the first. As a thriller writer, I was coming to cozy mysteries, and if you look at the definition of the high action thriller on one hand and the cozy mystery on the other, there are not two more diametrically opposed mediums. You just can't find two more mediums that are so in writing that are different. So I had really good editors at Berkley who tempered me, and I also learned to temper myself, especially after the first couple books. Mm-hmm. So as far as getting into the books, but here's the misnomer, and here's where labels go wrong. The fact is that there are principles. When I talk about writing, I talk about writing in general principles. I talk about suspense. I talk about pacing. That's whatever you're writing. It doesn't matter. Writing a great story is about getting the reader to want to go on to the next chapter, the next page, the next paragraph. So the things I brought in principle to Murder, She Wrote, those principles of the thriller, that every chapter begins with a hook and every chapter begins with a cliffhanger. And to get back to your original question, the most important thing was not Don Bain. The most important thing was not Jon Land. The most important thing is these books belong to Jessica Fletcher. Mm-hmm. And you have to write in the voice of, as a writer, I wanted to find Jessica's voice to me, which was the Angela Lansbury voice from the television show.
Sure.
Whenever I got stuck, I used the Angela rule. What would Angela Lansbury do? And as long as I heard her voice in my head, I was fine. Because I wrote every book I did like it was an extended version of the TV show. Sure. And the best compliments, and I think the biggest consensus, there are two consensuses that have emerged early on and then later. Early on, the consensus was I had no idea what I was doing, and that I had injected too much of the thriller into the traditional cozy format, turning it into a quote cozy thriller. The consensus that's emerged more recently, going out of a time with Murder and Red leading into the Murder of 12, is the fact that these are like the TV show. That reading the books under my name, my 4 books and the 5th one about to come out, is like revisiting the TV show, which is exactly the effect I was going for. I get, as an example, one of the things I'm criticized a lot for is the banter between Jessica and Mort Metzger. Now, part of it is justified. For instance, I had forgotten in the TV show, because Mort Metzger was only in 19 episodes. Amos Tupper was in far more, because a lot of the seasons that Mort Metzger was on the show were set elsewhere.
Right.
They were only setting 4 or 5 shows a season in Cabot Cove anymore. So the fact that Mort always called Jessica Mrs. F. He never called her Jessica, never called her Mrs. Fletcher. It was always Mrs. F. That's something, that was a mistake. I fixed that. However, the banter between them in my world of writing, which makes their conversations fun. If you have 2 people in a vehicle driving somewhere and they're talking, there's got to be conflict. There's got to be back and forth conflict, in the sense it could be wry, it could be under tongue in cheek, it could be, a little humorous. That's what I was going for. When you watch the TV shows, when she's with Amos Tupper, and I'm sorry, more with Mort Metzger, there's a lot of Mrs. F, here we go again, So I think that people have to understand or have to go into my take on the series, knowing they're getting novelized versions of non-existent TV shows from Murder, She Wrote.
Sure.
They're not getting a continuation of the series. I chose to imitate the TV show and follow the TV show. I chose not to imitate or follow the wiki, the lexicon of the book series.
Sure. And it's funny, you sort of brought up the point that people had sort of forgotten the differences between the TV show and the book series. And I think maybe in large part that's because Donald Bain's books actually came along really towards the end of the show.
That's exactly
and
right.
Coming out far after the show was off the air, and for a long time it was much more difficult to find Murder, She Wrote to tune into. I mean, now you can stream it, it's readily available, but for a couple decades there, it was the book, and people forgot.
Because you can trace the rise in popularity in terms of reader reviews of my books to just what you said. When the Murder, She Wrote TV series was made available on Amazon Prime, and more people started to sample it, people started to enjoy my take on the series more than they had in the first 2 books. And part of that too is I had to find my way. It's like jumping into a race after all the other runners are already, it's like you don't have your pace yet. I had to learn what I was doing. And I think there's a learning period, a learning curve in the sense for anybody taking over something. But again, I'm not a writer who is going to take something over and imitate what the last person did. If I can't take ownership of something, I'm the wrong person for the job.
Sure. And I might come back to that point in a little bit, but I would say, even I sort of had mixed feelings just because I'd known the Donald Bain books so well, and actually probably better than I knew the television show, which I've realized in more recent times. So there was on the one hand, there was that sense of relief. Okay, Jessica's, going to go on. There will be more books, but what will their tone be? But I think I was fortunate in the sense that I was already, familiar with your book, and sure, I knew you as a thriller author, and I'd read many of your books, so I knew, they're going to feel a little bit different, but you know how to tell a story. Whereas I think a lot of the really hardcore fans who might not have been, familiar with you, of course, there's going to be a little bit more of an adjustment period.
If you look at how a TV show is structured, there are cliffhangers every 8 minutes back in those days, because there was a commercial break and they had to get you to come back to the show. Remember, Murder, She Wrote started before DVR, before video cassette. If you wanted to watch something else, you changed the channel. And the big thing about how television was written, those TV shows were written in 6 or 7 or 8 acts, depending on how many commercial breaks there were. That is much more in keeping with the structure of the thriller than it is with the classic structure of the cozy mystery. when Don took over the series, he wasn't thinking about those 7 or 8, or when he started the book series, because until me, he was the only one who did it. I was writing, if you actually look at the books, you could probably point to those. It's probably more because these would be 90-minute movies, and they did a few of those. They did 4 90-minute movies after the show went off the air. Just like, the Columbos, when Columbo was stretched out from 1 hour to 2 hours. And a lot of people don't realize that if you consider the greatest TV mysteries of all time, a lot of people will say Columbo and Murder, She Wrote. They were written by the same people.
Right.
They were created by the same studio. So there is a symbiosis there. But to get back to the point, the idea of that I ruined or changed Murder, She Wrote by adding cliffhangers and pacing and suspense. No, I didn't. That's in the TV series. And the TV series was iconic. It was a top 10 show for all but one of its years, where for some reason they moved it from Sunday to Thursday against must-see TV on NBC. Then they moved it back to Sunday in the end, and it started doing very well again. Like Bonanza. They never moved Bonanza out of Sundays, right? But they moved Murder, She Wrote. So I actually think objectively that my approach to Murder, She Wrote was consistent, and also much more in keeping. The greatest mail I get, the greatest emails I get, I won't call it fan mail. Reader mail is not fan mail. But also seeing stuff on Amazon. Forget how many stars it is when someone says, "This made me remember when I sat on the couch and watched Murder, She Wrote with my mother."
Yeah.
It had the same tone, the same feel. And to that point, when the show started streaming, a lot of people discovered the books, and they discovered the series of books with my books. So they were much more, the newer readers that I've brought to the series embrace my approach to a great degree, because they mimic the style of the television show.
Sure. And your point is well taken too, because I remember that Murder, She Wrote on Sunday nights after 60 Minutes, it was appointment TV. You sat down with your family and friends and you all had that time together, and appointment TV does not really exist anymore.
No.
And also, as you mentioned, I think maybe the greatest mystery of all when it comes to Murder, She Wrote is why they would take something with that perfect setup and think to put it against Friends and the other must-see TVs on Thursday night. But, it lives on. It always lives on. So let me ask you about the Jessica Fletcher character, because she in herself is, very iconic. And of course, there's the expectation that no matter what happens, she will somehow prevail in the end. And readers, feel obviously very protective of her. She belongs to them. But she also belongs to you in a sense, and literally she is the property of Universal.
That's right.
So it has to be a difficult balancing act to satisfy readers, satisfy your creative vision, not do anything that's going to upset, the network, but also create a realistic sense of danger for a person who is going to prevail.
You're absolutely right. And the challenge for me is putting Jessica in different backdrops and saying, okay, this series has existed in some form almost nonstop from 1984 forward. So you're into 37 years, 36 years. We need to keep it fresh. We need to keep it moving. So once I got my feet firmly on the ground and took that ownership, and that would be after the first 3 books, when I went off formally on my own. If the last book 50 in the series, I did something nobody had ever done before. I introduced readers to the young Jessica Fletcher, A Time for Murder, which just came out in mass market. Thank God there are somebody can still publish mass market well. That's basically how I started my career, and for many years has remained how I sell most books, but has changed a lot. So A Time for Murder, I wanted to do something nobody had ever done before. I wanted to do, it's like you want to challenge yourself, but you also want to give the audience something they've never seen before.
Right.
You want to give them a reason to come back. That's why they did the great 2-part episodes for years on shows like Star Trek and almost every show did those 2-part episodes because they had to come up every week with a way to bring you back.
Sure.
And my way of bringing you back to the books was I'm not going to just go through the motions. I'm going to challenge myself to say, what can I do different in this book that I didn't do last book and that the reader hasn't seen? A Time for Murder, a young Jessica Fletcher. And then in The Murder of 12, I decided to basically create a Murder, She Wrote version of the most famous mystery ever written. And then there were none. Part of being a writer, a storyteller, is being willing to take risks. And if I'm going to miss, if I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail shooting high instead of shooting low by doing what was done before and just putting out boilerplate, plug in the numbers, books that computers could write. I want to go beyond that. So in The Murder of 12, you see something you've never seen before, certainly in the books. Now, in the TV show, fans of the TV show will know almost right very early on that this is not only a homage to Agatha Christie, it's all The Murder of 12. I'm talking about the book you held up. It's also a homage to a lot of people's favorite episode of Murder, She Wrote TV show was Murder Takes the Bus, which was actually a takeoff of an old Twilight Zone show called Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up, where Jessica, Amos Tupper, and 10 other strangers are trapped in a diner during a raging storm because their bus broke down.
Right.
And what do they do from there? And that's what The Murder of 12 pays homage to.
Oh, I love it. And that was actually one of my favorites because Rue McClanahan was in that episode, right? From the Golden Girls.
You know what? I believe she was. To tell you the truth, I never realized that before. I think she was. I can almost picture the woman that woman. She was with her husband, and they were a little more dapper. They were a little more refined, which is part of something that comes out later. Because that's the fun of these isolated murders. You know the killer is in the room.
Yeah,
because it has to be. There is no other solution. Although I did find one. Spoiler alert. The Murder of 12. The clue of who the killer is revealed very early. But the killer, he or herself, himself or herself, not to give that away,
right,
is not revealed until very late. And I had so much fun. And I love to break a little news.
All right.
And I think great writers borrow, good writers steal. Good writers borrow, great writers steal. And I remembered this little thing. There's a little thing in The Murder of 12 that actually came from another classic TV show, The Wild Wild West, with James Conrad, with Robert Conrad as James West, like a James Bond in Western times. And there was an episode I always remembered because his foil was Megalito Lovelace, a dwarf who was this man who was bent on world domination in the 19th century. So it was a great show, and I actually got the idea, the very general visual. That's all it was. It was a visual.
Sure.
I remember. So a little trivia for you.
Oh, that's great. So there were a lot of, little different sparks of inspiration.
Show me my age, John.
Yeah, 40. Not a day over.
Right.
So let me follow up on that because, The Murder of 12, it's really a clever, book, and mystery fans are going to love it. Jessica fans are going to love it. And as you said, it really is an ode to Agatha Christie's classic. And she said, in her time, that was one of her favorite books that she'd written simply because it was so difficult to pull off. And she ended up, satisfied that she was able to find a way to do it. And she had, difficulty decades and decades ago, and that was before technology and all of the modern conveniences that we have to grapple with now. So how do you think about those things and still find a way to create some sense of realism and palpable terror, knowing that Jessica's a little bit more she's got a little bit more at her disposal than somebody back in the 1920s or 30s.
You take it away. That's a great question. You take it away. the murder of 12 takes place, not all of it, but the bulk of the book takes place inside one setting, Hill House Hotel, various settings within the hotel. But you're in there. There is a raging blizzard outside. Nobody's coming anywhere, and no one's going anywhere. No one's coming to her rescue. And as the night goes on, and the murders start happening, and Jessica realizes they might have been targeted by this serial mass murderer, which could or may not be a red herring. She keeps getting, the more stuff that gets thrown at her, the more the suspense ratchets up, the more I take away. First, it's cell phone service. So she can't talk to Mort. She can't talk to Dr. Mort Metzger, can't talk to Sheriff Seth Hazlitt, can't talk to Dr. Seth Hazlitt, can't talk to Sheriff Mort Metzger, can't talk to Harry McGraw anymore. Right. So suspense does not lie in giving someone nothing. Suspense lies in giving them everything they need and then taking it away a little bit at a time. Then the power dies. So by the end of the book, we are back on that island with a different kind of situation. But Jessica is in very much the same plight that the 10 characters who were lured to the deserted island and then there were none, also known as 10 Little Indians. The challenge I faced that I ignored for a while was the brilliance of the book to an extent. One of the great brilliances of Agatha Christie's classic is the fact that they're all being killed according to the nursery rhyme.
Right.
And the 10 figurines. And every time one dies, another figurine disappears. There were 10 figurines. And so matching up the murders that way was a stroke of genius by the greatest mystery writer of all time. I didn't have an answer for that until well into the book when I realized a grandfather clock.
Yes.
And every time somebody dies, another numeral gets crossed off. So I went back and inserted a grandfather clock into an earlier scene to establish the grandfather clock earlier, which had never been mentioned in any book in any of the previous books that mentioned Hill House. And then they notice when everyone gathers, because there's nothing better in these movies than when you bring everyone together, in the lobby, and Jessica starts going, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. And then they look at the clock when it strikes midnight, and the first two numerals are already crossed off, and then every time she comes back downstairs. So it's, there is something about being stuck, the claustrophobic sense that you can't get out. It was done so successfully in the original version, and also on Murder Takes the Bus. But it goes beyond that. So many movies have succeeded. Alien, if you're a sci-fi fan, was basically 10 Little Indians, and then there were none in space. Right. They're getting killed one at a time by a killer they can't see. And they're stuck. They can't go out into space to survive. They're stuck on that spaceship. In Jaws, Brody, Chief Brody, and Quint and Hooper are stuck on that boat. Yeah, the great thing, they're hunting the shark, but then the shark's hunting them.
Right.
They're stuck. So there is something wonderful about the claustrophobic nature of the one setting story, or at least 12 Angry Men, which was set entirely in a jury room. Assault on Precinct 13, in which only a sheriff and a prisoner are trying to defend the jail against these marauding thugs. They're stuck inside. We've seen this a lot. So it was so much fun to create this claustrophobic atmosphere. I call it the Murder, She Wrote version of Long Day's Journey into Night.
I love that.
So that was that. I had a blast.
Yeah, and it's great too because, going back to the point of trying to create a realistic, sense of suspense or endangerment for a character like this, it's kind of the perfect setup because you strand her with these people that she doesn't know well, and she's just sort of unwittingly there. And even if she wasn't an intended target, she becomes one because she's a witness to it all, and she also has sort of the brain power to put things together. So I thought that was a very clever way.
Right.
bringing her, since you burned down her house, John.
She's back in it in Murder in Season come December.
Oh, well, see, that's wonderful. Nice
She's back in her house because that's it. After the murder of 12, I couldn't. She had to go home.
So yeah, that hotel lost its charm real quick. So let me ask you this. I think you might have the distinction of writing the first Murder, She Wrote book that has to come with a cast of characters because there are so many people in this hotel. So let me ask you, how do you, when you have, all of these peripheral figures plus your principal characters, how do you meld them together, and how do you try to give sort of unique personalities to these characters, even though they're very much in the background? That's got to be a
I'd like to say there's a way I do it, but it's organic. It evolves through the course of the writing. When I started the book, I didn't know the Sprague sisters were going to be in there, those two twins who finish each other's thoughts constantly. I didn't know about the ne'er-do-well son who has the key card that allows him to get in any hotel room that he wants. So Jessica's in her suite when he walks in, and it's like, who's this guy? So the key thing is if you know too much yourself as a writer when you start, for me, then it's not as much fun. But I didn't know how I was going to fit all the pieces together. I didn't know until the moment came that a woman was going to be poisoned and keel over as she's giving a wedding toast at a table. I didn't know that. So there was an organic nature to the evolution. I did do something. You mentioned the cast of characters. I had never done a book where there were so many people in so many scenes all the time. So I actually had the wiki in. I have to keep referring to it. I never have to do that because I was forgetting names. I was forgetting how one character was connected to another. I was forgetting whose date was who for the weekend. It was, so I was relying more on literally a program. Just to remember the names and who they were and how they connected to each other. And basically it's two halves of a wedding party.
Right.
So already you have built-in tension. And then you throw in missing money and you keep throwing in stuff. I tell people, I used to have a rule: when in doubt, blow stuff up. That's how I started my career. Now I realize you don't have to blow stuff up. You just have to always you have to bait the hook. A missing suitcase. Jessica, one of the great things that's fun for me about writing Jessica is her powers of observation. Like Columbo, she sees things no one else sees. A gap in a closet, a hotel closet between suitcases that's just big enough for a tote bag, but where's the tote bag?
Right.
Clues like that become crucial. It also contains the ultimate locked room murder. Like, one of the characters is murdered and we hear it going on, and the door opens, there's a dead body, and where's the killer?
Right.
Where did he go? Where did she go? And that brings in a kind of gothic element, but also Jessica says, okay, there are clues in there. What I just told you is a clue. You know enough to know who the murderer is right now if you're watching this without even reading it. And what Jessica's actually upset with herself at one point for not realizing something that could have given away the killer much earlier because she failed. And that's, like, she's not perfect. And she realizes, I should have remembered something that I didn't. But it was such a fun book to write, just for those reasons.
Yeah, and it's a fun book to read. I mean, any mystery fan would enjoy it. And if you love Agatha Christie, like, this takes you right back to that. But one of the things I really appreciate about your contributions, the series, is you really bring a freshness to it. And something that I really enjoyed that you were able to do in this book is you sort of did some role reversal in the sense that, Jessica's stranded in this hotel and there's feet and feet of snow. And as you mentioned, there's somebody who drops at dinner after she's been poisoned. Mort Metzger is otherwise engaged. And so she finds herself, not only the amateur sleuth, the stand-in for law enforcement, but she all of a sudden is a doctor as well. And you have Seth Hazlitt doing a little bit of detective work from his house. So that was, kind of a fun little trade-off.
Again, something we haven't seen before, something to do that hasn't been done, to challenge myself, to give the reader something they haven't seen before. The mark of any great series is to be able to read them in any order and still enjoy them just as much. I think this is going to be the first book a lot of people ever read in Murder, She Wrote. And they might never read another, who knows, because this is so different in so many ways because of the ambition that I built for it. And the execution, it's one thing to have a concept. And I lived with this for over a year, almost 2 years. I lived with this concept in my head before I actually started writing it. So who knows all the stuff that my imagination knew, my subconscious knew, that my conscious mind didn't know. And that's the fun. Of all the Murder, She Wrote books I've done, which is now 6 because this one's coming out and the next ones are all done, this is the one I could most see as a Murder, She Wrote movie. But as we know, as some people know, CBS was going to do a reboot with Octavia Spencer, and Octavia Spencer, Angela Lansbury wasn't happy about it.
Right.
Octavia Spencer was the one who pulled the plug, said, "I can't do this."
I remember.
And that's part of the reason why I conceived A Time for Murder, the previous title, number 50, that came out, that's out in paperback now. I wanted to come up with a way that the studio could relaunch the series,
Right.
Bring it to Hallmark, bring it to CBS. And how do you do this? You do it with a young Jessica Fletcher before she's successful, while she's still an English teacher. She's starting out in her career, and then everything else is the same but it's set somewhere else. It's set in Maine, but it's not Cabot Cove.
Right.
There'll be a cast of characters. In that book, there's a younger Amos Tupper who's a detective.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like going back to the beginning. And you could have Angela Lansbury introduce every episode.
Oh,
so she's still the older Jessica Fletcher. And there's a character playing not Jessica Fletcher, John, but playing Angela Lansbury.
Oh,
Because
awesome.
that's the thing. If you're going to do this series again, Angela Lansbury is such an inspiration. You noted in an email to me that I dedicated the book to her.
Right.
I think it was this one, right, that I dedicated to her. And I couldn't have written this series without her in my head, because I'd watch a couple episodes, or I'd watch an episode every day when I was writing this,
Right.
The books, because I wanted her voice in my head, because her voice, it's is it Jessica Fletcher? Yes. But I think the biggest difference between Don Bain's 46 books and my 5 books now is the fact that you're hearing Angela Lansbury's voice now. You're getting it the way she would have done it, as Angela Lansbury playing Jessica Fletcher, as opposed to just Jessica Fletcher. I've never been involved in something where I could say something like that, and I hope it makes sense.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, I think you can't help but hear her voice and sort of see her mannerisms. And it's great that you can equate the two. And I did want to ask you as well, again, one of the things that you've done to freshen things up is you have, brought back characters that were beloved on the television show, but that really didn't exist, in the 46 installments of the book prior to your involvement. You mentioned Harry McGraw, our favorite PI from New York. You mentioned Amos Tupper, whose voice I thought you captured really, really brilliantly in A Time for Murder. So that's got to be fun, and it's also something that, even though it exists, in film, you can make your own, because those characters don't exist in the book world. Or at least not until this point. Now they do, but they're very much, a part of it.
And that's part of the fun. People forget that the Seth Hazlitt character, brilliantly played by William Wyndham, did not exist I don't even know if he came in the first season, maybe toward the end, but that character, the one that she kept working with, her foil was Claude Akins, Ethan Cragg, the fisherman character. But he was a little gruff. He was a little raw. You couldn't bake pies with Claude Akins,
Right.
who was like the front man, Charles Bronson, a big, strong, guy, always got the roles that Charles Bronson turned down. So William Wyndon was a great addition, but I wanted to put Ethan Cragg back in the books, and he appears in The Murder of 12. Little spoiler alert, little preview. Season for Murder, we meet Grady Fletcher for the first time, and I think he might have come into one of the other books a long time ago. But Grady Fletcher comes to Cabot Cove with Little Frank. We've never met Little Frank before. Grady's son and Jessica's grandnephew. And a train set that Jessica buys Little Frank for Christmas becomes a clue to who the murderer is. But I had so much fun bringing family into Murder in Season, which won't be out till December. But because that's what it's about. It's about going back to the TV series and saying, okay, look at what we're going to do now. I had done that in Manuscript for Murder with a character named Artie Gelber, who was played by Herb Edelman on the TV series.
Right.
Or I think he actually is in 5 or 6 episodes when she's in New York.
Yes.
Yep. While there was more Lieutenant Artie Gelber than there was Mort Metzger, because they moved the series to New York for 2 years to freshen it up. She's teaching and she's solving crimes in New York City. And I loved an email. Somebody gave it 1 star, one of my earlier books of the series, and criticized me. And this is typical of what I'm talking about. Criticized me for the fact that Jessica Fletcher would never have that expensive an apartment in New York City.
She did for all
She lived in an apartment that she owned in New York City for 2 years of the series. I didn't make that up.
Paying for it.
So again, the books also, somewhere in the books, Adele, Mort Metzger's never seen wife, leaves him, and he remarries a woman named Maureen. Well, I had never read that, so Adele is still Mort's wife, and for Murder in Season, Murder in Season, another little preview for December. You're going to see his red Eldorado convertible again.
Oh, that's great.
So you can see I am all in on the TV series.
Yeah. Sure.
And this is the way, and you made the greatest point. No one's made that point before about streaming, how streaming has brought new viewers to Murder, She Wrote, who, when they read the books, are going to want the feeling of Jessica Fletcher as they know her as Angela Lansbury. They're going to want my Jessica Fletcher. They're going to want that voice. If in the books, keep something in mind. The books are first person. Jessica Fletcher is in every single scene of every book. But in the TV show, it's third person, obviously. So there are some episodes she's barely in at all.
Right. And
there's a lot of episodes she utterly dominates and is in practically every scene, like Murder Takes the Bus.
Right.
She's in every scene of Murder Takes the Bus. So the challenge is different because I can't cut away. I can't cut away to another point of view. I have to stick with Jessica Fletcher's point of view. So there's ruminations about how she thinks and about how she writes, and you get into her head and see how she's solving a crime.
Right.
And the fun part is when she realizes something, but I don't tell you right away what she realized. You have to, again, it's the 8-minute mark. It's time for a commercial, and I've got to bring you back.
That's right. The light bulb goes off, but you don't know exactly why.
Absolutely.
Anyway, if you don't mind, I have a couple more quick questions, and then I will let you get on with your day because you've done a nice job of breaking.
I have no day. This is my day.
You're wonderful. I appreciate that. Well, I'm enjoying it too, because it's not often I get to indulge my, Murder, She Wrote, Jessica Fletcher, Angela Lansbury adoration, because not everybody gets it. I don't know what's wrong with them. They should. But I did want to ask, because we talked about, the freshness that you bring to the series, but you also, you've mentioned that you pay attention to what readers are saying, and you read your reviews, and you read the letters or the notes that you get, the
Yeah,
emails.
sometimes to my detriment.
Of course. But I have to say, a lot of people were asking, where's George Sutherland, which was a character that Donald Bain, originated in the book series, and he became pretty prominent, but you brought him back,
I did bring him back.
And will we see him again?
I haven't gotten that far in my thinking, but the reason I brought him back was because I was conscious of the fact, and I'll be very honest here, that with A Date with Murder, I think I probably made a few assumptions. I was so gung-ho to do it and so happy that I had the opportunity. The answer is yes. What was the question, right? I think some things slipped away from me in my first A Date with Murder, like the Mrs. F. There were things and obviously I wrote a murder, and I started the book in which he appears after. That was the third book I did. So I already knew the feedback on A Date with Murder. I wanted to do something to pay homage to Don Bain, and also to reward his fans for their loyalty. And I had the perfect setup to bring a potential romantic interest in. So I used that for Murder in Red. There are only 4 Sherlock Holmes novels. The rest were all short stories. There are only 28, I believe, Hercule Poirot books that Agatha Christie wrote. I think there are 85 Perry Masons, but I don't think all of them are books. I think a lot of them were short stories. Don Bain wrote 46 books, and he wrote 2 a year pretty much every year. So I enjoyed Murder in Red as a kind of salute to a man who had an incredible career, but nobody knew. A lot of times he was outright ghosting. On Murder, She Wrote, at least he's on the cover.
Right.
I've also taken over the Capital Crime series, and his name was never on the cover of those books until maybe Margaret Truman passed away, and then very small, just like mine will be, because you have to look at what sells a book. And my name is not going to sell Murder, She Wrote, or Capital Crimes. So George Sutherland was my way of thanking Don Bain and saluting him, sure, as well as his fans, to say, hey, I get it. And that was kind of a bridge book. That brought me into A Time for Murder, which was the next one I did, which was 50, where I think I had gotten my sea legs, no pun intended, since Cabot Cove is a coastal town. I had gotten my sea legs, and it was time where I'd figured out how to blend the TV show. I had figured out that I believe that elusive combination, the cozy thriller with enough, because I don't like labels. And to me, what makes Murder, She Wrote still a cozy, because by the way, And Then There Were None is labeled a cozy.
Right, it is.
In Barnes & Noble. So if you can kill 10 people, I haven't killed that many in my last 3 books. So I guess I'm doing something right. I don't like labels. And the idea, to me, what makes this still a cozy series is you're going to a place you're very familiar with people who are like your friends. And twice a year, you're going to see Harry and Seth and Mort. It's not where you are. It's where you are and who you're with. Sure. The rest of what's happening is plot, is story. It's still cozy because you know the people. And by the way, Jessica Fletcher is not wielding samurai swords and M16s. She's not firing a gun. I have placed her in jeopardy. I have changed the pace of the books to more resemble the TV shows. And when I say cozy thriller, why are they cozy thrillers? Because now in just about every book, Jessica's life is in danger. That's the difference between a mystery and a thriller. But to me, that's an addition, not addition by subtraction. It's addition, period, because now you have a reason. And by the way, there are a number of pretty popular episodes of the TV series in which her life was in danger.
Right.
Not all. The Murder of Sherlock Holmes, it was not in danger. That was also a classic. The 90-minute pilot,
Right.
Which was, I think, still done. I want to say it was still done. I don't know. I seem to think it was redone as a 2-part episode, so maybe they put stuff back in. But I think it was a 90-minute pilot originally.
Right.
And then they went to the 1-hour format. But it's like it's almost like I would love to hear from Angela Lansbury. And if Angela Lansbury said, "You got it, you understand the series," because the series wasn't created by her.
Right.
It was created by NBC Universal. I think it had already been sold to CBS. And the original choice to play Jessica was Jean Stapleton, who was Edith Bunker. Once Angela Lansbury got involved, it became her series. She produced it. She decided she made all the big decisions, hiring and firing writers and everything. So what would mean more to me is Angela Lansbury to say, "Yep, these are in keeping with the spirit of the TV show. If I was making the TV show today, here's how I would do it." That would be the ultimate compliment. That hasn't happened yet.
Well, it could. She's leaving you in suspense, John.
She just did a play in London, so she's a very spry 92 or 93-year-old now.
Oh,
so, and if I were doing the series again, I would never do it without involving her somehow.
Right.
Now, of course, that's a lot higher. That's not my pay grade.
Of course.
Hopefully someone is watching this interview who's going to make that happen.
You know what? Let me put out an idea there too, okay? Murder, She Wrote, the musical. Angela Lansbury is Jessica Fletcher on Broadway. If Broadway ever reopens, why has that not been done?
You know what?
Because again, that's above your head.
I'm gonna go you one better. In a future Murder, She Wrote book, Jessica goes to L.A. We're going to get her out of Cabot Cove. But Mort Metzger and Seth Hazlitt and Harry McGraw are all there because they're visiting her in L.A. because she's on the set of a movie based on or a streaming series based on one of J.B. Fletcher's books.
Great. That's great.
And there's a murder on the set in L.A. Who's the detective who comes to investigate it?
Oh, my God.
Columbo.
Oh, my gosh. That's
Columbo was also owned by NBC Universal,
right.
As I mentioned before, and the producers were Levinson and Link.
Right.
I think it's William Link and Richard Levinson. So I would need permission to do that. But can you imagine Mrs. Fletcher? Lieutenant, can you imagine teaming up the two of the greatest TV detectives of all time?
Man, how good is that? I love it.
Oh, I would just, to me, because again, what do I say? What have we never seen before? Let's push the envelope. Every book that, if I continue this series, that's what I would want to do. I would want to continue pushing the envelope. It's kind of like the great line from Samuel Gold. It might have been Jack Warner, or it's attributed to both Jack Warner and Samuel Golden. And I think also I think it's been attributed to 5 people. But what do you want in your next big movie? The same thing, only different.
True.
So I want to give people the same thing in these Murder, She Wrote stories, only different. 300 episodes, 51 books now. How do you keep it fresh? Everything has a lifespan. And the challenge is, hey, they brought Perry Mason back.
That's true.
You see that? It doesn't look like
No.
Raymond Burr's not there. And by the way, don't get me started on remakes. Somebody tell me a remake, that was better than the original. Somebody, anybody, whoever is out there, give me a remake that was better than the original. I mean, please, don't do it. And if anybody ever, and here's golden rule number 2, never try to remake a Steve McQueen movie. Only Steve McQueen can play those. Any character ever played by Steve McQueen, but he was never in Murder, She Wrote. But one of the great things about the TV series is you go back and watch it. Because of Angela Lansbury, every big TV actor in that era wanted to work on Murder, She Wrote. Brian Keith, who had already moved on to movies, everybody said, can I get a role on Murder? It was almost like getting the honor of being a zombie in The Walking Dead, or a cameo in Game of Thrones. Ed Sheeran, Aaron Rodgers. They would be, if this were 30 years ago, that kind of person would want to be on Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to bring back to the book series. I want to bring that. I'm trying to bring the ambition back. I'm trying to make this, people forget how well those episodes were written. A good friend of mine, Tom Sawyer, was one of the showrunners too. Tom Sawyer wrote a lot of the best episodes. This was a brilliantly written TV show. And every episode had that saying, like in Columbo, and at that moment, that one twist where Angela Lansbury saw something that nobody else saw, that the door opened in and not out.
Right.
The refrigerator the refrigerator was warm as if the door had been left open, and that's when she realizes. There's always that aha moment, and I think you mentioned that earlier, where she figures out. So I really want to take the series back. I don't want to label it cozy thriller, cozy mystery. Can we just call it fun?
Absolutely.
Can we just call it? I can't wait to read. I can't wait to read this book. Let's dispense with the labels.
So that's the F word for it. Well, you know what? Actually, funny, to your point, a little bit of trivia for you. I don't know if you're aware of this, but we've talked about how, largely the books in the past have been considered cozy mysteries. And Don Bain had written dozens and dozens of books, and then he wrote one called Domestic Malice, which was a take on the Malice Domestic Conference. And all of a sudden, he got a bunch of flack because he broke some conventions of the cozy. And at that time, he said, I never even realized that I was writing a cozy, let alone that there were rules to them. He just thought he was writing traditional mysteries.
I don't think the term cozy mystery existed in 1984 when the TV show went on the air. I think it was coined later.
Right.
I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think I read that somewhere. And if that's the case, how, it's like, yeah, exactly. I think there's where Don and I are of the same thing. There are, I think cozies, a lot of them are lighter. A lot of them are funny. A lot of them, I think there are some people who might look at Sue Grafton and say, well, maybe these are, because you get the first person, and she's always into Kinsey's always into, what she's, what she's wearing and what she's cooking and the kids and all this stuff. There's a cozy element there too. And that's why I say, forget labels.
Yeah.
Just tell a great story. Have fun reading it. And I would say this, I said, the thing about writing first person, and people say, well, I'd never done it before and I hadn't, this was the first time. What do I like about it the most? And I realized what I'd always been doing, because I'm a storyteller. And the mark of a great book, here it is. It feels like it was written just for you.
Right.
It feels like there was no one else in the writer's mind. They wrote it for you. And in first person, Jessica's talking to you. Jessica is speaking. You're the only one in the room reading it at that time, right? Or listening to it at that time, or on your computer, or, physical book. So it is just you and her. It's the two of you in a room alone. And it's very intimate in the sense that not only are you in bed with Jessica Fletcher,
really, right.
or me, you can't fall asleep, you can't put the book down, and now you're continuing to turn the pages. Where is it said that a cozy can't be a page turner?
Right.
Where is it said that, is there some, because if someone hands me rules and say, here are the rules of writing a cozy, here they are. No cliffhangers, no suspense, no blood, no this, no that, no blah, 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 blah. No such rules exist. They exist in the preconceived notions of people, who just hold it up and say, well, I don't like you because you didn't follow the rules. What rules? Just enjoy. I wrote this for you. I wrote it just for you. When Jessica's speaking, she's speaking only to you. It's the only book I'm going to sell. One book. 25,000 times is the way to look at it. Right. Not 25,000 books. Or in my case, maybe one book or 10. Not 25,000, more like 10, maybe 15. On a good day, 20.
Hey, this could be the one.
Maybe.
Oh, Jon, well, thank you, so much for talking to me. I will reveal to you that usually I dress a little more for the occasion just because there aren't many occasions to get, gussied up for anymore. But I thought, what better occasion to wear the I killed them all, Jessica.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, the conspiracy theory.
Maybe that'll be the ultimate plot twist at the end of the day.
That is the perfect shirt. You should have shown that earlier. But what a great way to finish.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.